Hi, I'm Jack Skeels. Welcome to this webinar, Understanding the Scope, Who Owns It and Why. Let's get rolling. For those of you attending live, use the Q&A panel. If you have questions, we had some great questions in the previous session today. And also there will be an on-demand webinar link available if you email us by simply replying to the email that you got upon registration and the numerous notifications you get sent. I get them all too. So just reply to any of those and that goes to our team and someone will take care of you and send you an on-demand webinar link for it. So let's get rolling today. The content here is slightly duplicative with the why poor scoping and handoffs cause agency burnout webinar. So a little bit of repetition there, but we are going to go into some new material, especially in the latter, basically 2/3 of the deck. Waiting on PowerPoint to get me going here. Here we go. All right, love that image. Oh, didn't update. A little bit about me, management consultant with a business degree. I actually taught at two different universities, also worked at RAND Corporation, the think tank, as a senior analyst and researcher in complex organizations. I'll talk a little bit about that today, but otherwise spent several years in agencies, in fact, running Sapiens Los Angeles office, and eventually became a consultant in the field and worked with a lot of agencies over the last 14, 15 years as part of AgencyAgile and the like. I did recently publish a book. Oops, sorry about that. Published a book. We've gotten 4 awards now. Just got one last Friday. So you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at other places too, but nobody buys it anywhere else from what I can tell. So Amazon is the place. 5 stars still last time I checked on Amazon. So that's pretty cool. All right. So this is, again, the second of 3 webinars that we have in our scoping series, if you will. And the question we want to ask is, how well do you scope and hand off? And how much better can you be at scoping and handing off things? And the key answer to that has to do with what's your rework rate. So rework rate is literally the percentage difference between what you thought you would spend on the work and then the actual hours you spend on it. Simple example. Most agencies have rework rates of 25 to 40%. Almost all agencies do. Most agencies just like accept that as a way of life. The interesting thing is you don't need to accept it as a way of life, that you can actually reduce your rework rate by 50 to 80%. We actually have had clients reduce it to almost zero. Okay. So it's very fixable and it's very rewarding to do so. Both you need to have the discipline to do it, but increases not only margin but team and client satisfaction levels are the big thing. All right, there are some things I'd like you to retain from this webinar, sort of key learnings that'll help your journey through agency life go a little bit better. And one of those is that you've got a bunch of assumptions that are broken, and these wreak havoc on agencies. Okay, when people talk about the scope, they think that the problem is with the scope that they've talked about. It's not. I'll explain that. And that you just need to try harder. Why aren't we talking about the scope more? That kind of thing. That briefings and handoffs really work. I talk about this extensively in the other webinar. I'll touch on it briefly here. Another one is that senior people estimate well. This is always a go-to inside an agency. And senior people, in that I include the account people and I include project managers also. I'll show you a little bit of research on it, which is very interesting. And lastly, the biggest fallacy is that the sales scope is the delivery scope. Now, what type of scope matters the most? The most important scope is the scope you don't talk about. It's unknown scope. It's scope you're ignorant of. It's unknown. It's out of scope that you didn't talk about. The real scope comes in a bunch of different forms. Okay, knowable. You can see this: knowable and understood. Type 2 is you know about scope, but you actually are getting it wrong. Right? Okay, so you think you know the answer, but you don't. And a lot of times this happens when we assume scope that's actually true scope, but we assume the wrong option in that scope, right? there is, of course, uh, type 3 there, which is it's scope that you can't know right now, but we understand that we're going to need to know it. And then there's number 4, which is the deep uncertainty scope. It's not knowable right now, and we don't understand that we need to know it. Now, about 25 to I think it's just coincidence. I can tell you a number. About 25 to 40% of project scope falls into category 3 or 4. Yeah, or actually 2, 3, and 4 total. But most of it is in 3 and 4. Okay. Is that we don't know it, but we know we probably do need to know it, but we're not talking about it. Right. Okay. And the last one is it's just truly unknowable, okay, at this stage. And those are, yeah, that's a tough one, but actually, if you can solve 2 and 3, you're way ahead of the game. That's the lion's share of the scope, and it makes 4 become more obvious as well. Um, these red cards on on this wall here. This is from one of our 4-day training programs. They were scoping a massive project for the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. It was a $2 million project. Got sold, signed, and delivered, or sold and signed at $2 million. About an extra $600,000 in missing scope and unknowns that they had not even thought about as part of the very extensive sales process. Now, the reality of clients is your clients are not the people who are going to find scope for you, um, and they're not the people who change scope. Okay, the reality is that if you're discovering scope, that they'll discover it with you, and they're hoping you're going to be different, that you're going to help them understand scope better than you do. Now, I want to be clear about scoping because a lot of times people think scope is definitive, and this is scope is a misnomer. Okay, it should actually be called estimate. Okay, there's almost zero ability to actually really create accurate scope in the agency world. Okay, scope, the scope that you say is the scope, and it gets even worse when we talk about sales scope versus delivery scope. The scope that you say is a scope is an approximation, and it's an incomplete one. Okay? So when you say, what's the project scope? The answer is like, well, I don't know, but it doesn't really matter that much because the biggest thing that matters in scope is what we're not scoping and not talking about. All right. Scoping is done typically in agencies at the point of maximum ignorance, the start of the project. And I should add in a little asterisk here and a footnote, and usually by the wrong people. I'll come back to that idea. The way to think about this is if we've got this graph here, understanding how well we understand is the vertical axis. And then we've got the project life cycle on the horizontal axis. The example I like to use on the left-hand side of this black bar, we're building a house, that's the blueprint, and the right-hand side is the house. Now, our understanding of the house doesn't really change. It doesn't change much. It will change a little. We may even modify what we want to do with the house as we're seeing it develop, and sometimes we'll even change the blueprints, right? But this is a very plannable project, if you will. It's a very understandable project. It's easy to say. It's easy to say that scope is definitive. If it says 3 bedrooms on the blueprint, then it should be 3 bedrooms in the house. An agency doesn't do that. An agency says, we're going to redo the holiday campaign, the new holiday campaign for the client. What did we do last year? Well, look at that, then throw it away. We want to figure out something new. So they're literally saying, what kind of house do we want? And that makes agency projects 2 things. One, they're hard to plan, but the reason they're hard to plan is because scope is so amorphous early in the projects. How can you you want the most accurate scope, by the way? You want to really have the most accurate scope. Wait until the project is over and then you know the scope exactly. Okay. So now this is the dilemma is that agency projects have this very steep curve. And if you look at where I need to be, get my pen out here. If this is how knowledgeable I want to be, how late in the project is that when I can finally get there? That's the challenge, right? And even if I'm off by a little bit in my little diagram, maybe it's down here, still a challenge, right? Even here, still a challenge. I'm halfway through the project and I'm just learning the scope. Okay? This is the fundamental agency scope problem. All right. Wait till the project's done. You have it. All right. So the scope you talked about is not the problem. The problem is scope you didn't talk about. That you just need to be scoping harder is not, it doesn't solve the problems as well. And the previous webinar, I talked a lot about this briefing and handoffs problem. Okay? I'm going to take you through a thing we call the ignorance gap, which is basically why your briefings suck. And what happens inside of projects, we think they'll go well, and we have this optimistic view of how well we understand the project. Okay, like once we've signed the contract, we must understand it. And in fact, when you look at project success rates that are project managed projects, okay, well you see, and these are all projects that are innovation based projects. This is a sample of 3,000 projects, a retrospective 2-year sample run every 2 years by the Standish Group. You'll see that projects that involve multiple stakeholders, high levels of uncertainty, in fact, don't run all that well. And so what we really see is that people think they understand, but they don't. The actual understanding of scope looks something like this, including these very predictable experiences. One is where everyone's optimistic about how well this project is going to go. And then the chasm of despair when the team finally gets the project and starts asking the real tough questions. And of course, Mount Death March when the team figures out how to get there. Now, we call this the ignorance gap because it's the difference between how ignorant you think you are and how ignorant you really are, or your agency is. Right? It's driven by personality or behavior, if you will. And the behavior thing is that on the left-hand side, we've got a bunch of people doing the selling. Okay, they're very optimistic about the world. Okay, they deal with it. Optimism comes from the being able to look into the future and ignore the fact that you've got volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That's what it takes to be brave and sell, right? Hopeful, if you will. The people in the back of house that do the delivery are a little bit more despair based. In other words, they actually are like, wow, everything's hard to do because it isn't simple, right? And we sure like simplicity and understanding and not non-volatility, et cetera. So this, and we brief from left to right. We sell from left to right. The people on the left sell something, ask the people on the right to deliver it. Okay? This is the fundamental problem. People on the left say that's scope, and the people on the right say, no, that's just a bunch of ideas. Okay, you haven't defined scope yet. Okay, and your scope is highly imprecise. Now, generally, you're not good at briefing, and also you're generally not good at creating scope. And there's a good reason for it. Okay, and why does the client keep changing scope? Okay, because you're both discovering scope as the project goes on. Now, Mount Death March propagates itself into agencies as follows. We've got that slide, and then we rescue the failing projects. We can't afford to fail as agency. We'll lose our clients. And then we cannibalize resources from the successful projects. This creates a problem called contagion. Okay, bad projects serve good projects, clients, money, et cetera. And in fact, I can tell you empirically, more than half the misery in the agency comes from this scope challenge. So remember, we've got this problem. One is you think you know scope, you don't. Okay. By the way, you think you hand off scope and briefings well, you don't. Okay. And the fact that these two things fail creates a cascade, okay, of contagion where one project going bad robs from other projects. And you've heard this before. Hey, we had 8 weeks to do this. Why are we starting now 4 weeks late? Okay. So what happened to the other 8 weeks? Now we don't have enough time to actually do a good job on this. And you'll probably get it wrong, which means it'll go over and wipe out some other projects as well. So when you fix this problem, your agency runs a lot smoother. Now, the most common solution is to put what I call senior people or managers on it. We need to actually working with the client now, and they've got in their major accounts, they've got scope challenges, delivery challenges, and their answer was, we just need more managers on this. And literally, they have an action plan. It's basically, whatever. Jason, Alexandra, and Mitch will sit in on every meeting. I'm like, oh my God, that's the exact opposite of what you need to do because of some interesting things. One is there's a nice piece of research. There are multiple pieces of research done on boundaries of knowledge and the like, but there's a really nice study done of digital agency many years ago Senior people, and that is, it's prevalent in managers as well, systematic optimism. You saw that on the diagram, the left-hand side of the diagram. But they're also less aware of their own knowledge limits. In other words, when they get, they'll say things like, "How hard could it be?" Right? Shouldn't be that hard to figure out. Sure, we can get it done. Right? Those things are really have to do with their ability to solve problems, not an understanding of the actual scope. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we can get that to happen. Right? Um, in this digital agency research, the estimation error was greater in what we call the firefighter group. There's project managers and senior technologists. This was more of a web development environment, but again, these are human behaviors. It doesn't have to do with the agency platform and focus. PM and senior tech had greater estimation errors, and they estimated things were easier to do than they really were. So they were the most optimistic about future projects and new projects coming in. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. They were most optimistic about how projects had gone in the past. In other words, the people who actually do the project, the makers, if you will, team members, estimated far more accurately how bad the projects were than the managers did. So it's sort of like, hey, you've heard that phrase like, well, that's why your windshield is bigger than your rearview mirror, right? Okay. Well, if you're a maker, your windshield's smaller than your rearview mirror. You remember what this stuff is like, and you don't want to do it again, right? So this is interesting. This means that if a manager's thinking, well, it's like that other project, they're also thinking, well, that other project wasn't that bad. The last one is this sort of social influence theory thing, which is that they're more willing to shape numbers to something that people would like. This is a big deal. Okay, in other words, uh, basically like, well, I knew it was probably more than 1,000 hours, but the number they were looking for is 1,000, so I gave them 1,000. Okay, so now we give a number that we know is wrong, and we put our reputation behind it, and say, well, we'll figure it out, right? And that kind of thing. So that happens all the time at agencies, and it's one of the problems with senior estimation. What we see a lot of times is that a more team-based estimation works a lot better. How do you do it? It's actually pretty tricky. But inevitably, and we're going to slide into our new topic now, this is an example of a spreadsheet. And back in, 6, 8 years ago, a lot of times we'd ask for the project when we're coming in teaching them how to rescope a project. We'd say, hey, send us the resource sheet. Okay. And you can see that this has got total LOE, total level of effort, and it had 21 weeks as listed, and you can see there's the different roles, 96 hours for creative director, 460 hours for whatever, and then there's the yellow column, which we call the yellow column of death. And where these numbers come from? Well, what they are, and you notice they're sort of rounded as well, like they're not 203, that's 160. That's done by someone in the selling process saying, hey, we need to get the numbers to work. So these are imaginary numbers, okay? Imaginary hours, okay? This isn't even scope, okay? This is scope minus something. So we're think about this. We've got scope that we don't know a lot of the scope, 25 to 40%. And by the way, we've asked people to estimate the stuff we know, and then we're going to discount it to actually make it fit as well, right? So the projects run with imaginary hours always come in higher than expected. Okay. So this is a sales business dev problem, right? Okay, we just need to fix the selling. We had a question in the previous session where someone said, well, so how do I do that in the crush of selling and all that kind of thing? And the answer is you can't. Selling and delivering are separate things, and they should be. They're two, it's church and state, however you want to think about it. Basically, you need sales. It gives you the problem that you need to solve. Solving the problem is not solving a sales problem, it's solving a delivery problem. Okay. So I'm going to take you through why we scope in sales, because you might be saying, why do we scope anyways, right? There's a reason why we scope in sales, and this is a bunch of the sort of a roll up of the work done in the area of law and it's called LEC, Law, Economics, and Contracting. And so how do contracts work? How does sales happen? This is the market clearing function, if you will. I want to get a campaign done by some agency. Agencies want to do campaigns. How do we actually make that transaction happen when there's so much uncertainty? So think about this for a second. If we have so much ignorance in our projects as agencies, and we do, it would be the equivalent of me coming to you and um, saying, "Hey, I want to sell you a car, but I can't tell you a lot about it. It does have four wheels and a windshield, right? And how are we going to ever close this transaction, okay, if I can't tell you more about it?" And in part, what I'm going to need to do, since I can't show you the car because it isn't built yet, I'm going to have to lie. I'm going to have to tell you things I think are true that may or may not be true, right? So essentially, the ability for us to say what it's going to be lowers the risk in the transaction, but doesn't eliminate it. One of the reasons it doesn't eliminate it is because we haven't built it yet, so we don't even know if we're correct about what we're saying, okay? But it does lower the risk, especially the perception of risk in the buyer. So buyers and sellers manage risk through pricing and payment strategies. Okay, I think it sounds like a good thing, but I'm going to do 4 milestone payments. So there's a pricing and payment strategy. I'm going to float the money to you in this sequence kind of thing, or some of you're going to earn if some other things happen, contingent payments, stuff like that. Now, having a price and a poorly defined scope, okay, allows the transaction to happen. It's unlikely that actually you would ever get to a point of marketplace oriented, open market transaction where there's very detailed specification. As much as buyers try to do that, they, as you know, you respond to RFPs, they're always a pile of junk. They've got a lot of stuff in there, but they don't talk about the stuff they don't talk about. Right? So let's see what I think this is the most common form of sales transaction in the agency business, and most executives agree, in fact. Okay. We've got, we're not going to use all these folks. This is from my a set of vignettes that I use in some of our trainings. But we're going to do Arthur and Angela in this one. Okay. So here we go. Angela, Arthur. Okay. And Angela comes in. Hey, got a new project. Arthur's, yeah, 200K needed by November 15th. Make it May 15th, right? Okay, let me get a team on it. We've got the new AgencyAgile technique, and we'll see if we can do it for that 200K. And Arthur's like, well, hold on, right? Do you want it or not? And Angela's like, I don't know. He says, because there's another agency, they'll say yes to it. Okay? And another agency will say, we'll take the 400K and we're going to figure it out. So if you want sales today, what you have to do is make a very good judgment about whether or not it's risky or not risky enough for you. You want to try and scope it and align on scope as part of the transaction, the sales transaction. Highly unlikely for a new client or a client who hasn't ever worked in that mode. Now, using our techniques, you can get your clients eventually to that spot where they're like, hey, we don't want to do this. Every time we do a project, let's do this. Let's figure out the real scope for it, that kind of thing. But in fact, this is the challenge that you need the deal. You need to tell yourselves when selling things that you hear on the plateau of optimism shouldn't be hard to do. We just all day long. What can't we do? My favorite for some amount of dollars, and bargaining things, right? Ways of thinking about. And this last one often is very true. Okay? That is, okay, I made $200,000. It's going to keep 5 people in their seats for the next 4 months or something like that, right? And that's way better than losing them. Then I have to go find more people, right? And I may not make much money, I may not make any money, but I actually pay for them and I keep our team together. Okay. So here's the real point. Is it a bad decision to take a project when you don't have scope? Well, I mean, you don't want to be stupid about it, but all day long, agencies are able to take projects that have a 20 to 25 to 40% rework rate. Okay. So you can be off and still survive. You just won't prosper, but that's what agencies do. Okay. Probably not a bad decision to take that project. Now, You need two scopes though. One is for selling. It's a nice story. It's got to be believable. It's got to be realistic. It's got to, it has to be good enough to actually manage some of the biggest risks, right? It's not that you're not going to have people talking about what's in the scope or anything like that, but you're not going to try and dial it in to a second thing, which is the one that you have for delivery, the delivery scope. And here's the difference between these two things. Scoping for selling, okay? Optimistic, you want a lightweight process. We actually teach a process for doing that, but you got to learn the delivery method first because that's the one that matters, is making sure you deliver it well. Ballpark park price. It needs to be defining scope in a way that, by the way, defining scope simply enough for the client to understand, or else you need to educate the client as part of doing that. Okay. And it needs to look like you're competent and you've listened to the client, et cetera. You need to demonstrate that you're being responsive. Those things are all key in being capable, all that kind of thing. Now, you got the deal. Now it's delivery scope. Now we want to be pessimistic, right? We want to make sure we know all the resources we need as much as we don't blow up projects, cause contagion, that we can actually deliver on time, right? It needs to be understandable, a scope that's understandable by the people who have to do it, who care about the details. And that includes, by the way, the client needs to understand the project, okay, along with the team. There's a very important idea here, which is who really should be owning scope inside of the organization. Selling scope, we can see who owns that, right? Delivery scope should not be owned by the selling team. It needs to be owned by delivery teams, by the team, not project managers. So to recap a couple points here. One is, no, you don't need to fully scope every project before you win it. You can't adjust how much diligence you spend on that based on risk, all the key factors you would normally do, right? But always rescope for delivery. If you took the deal without understanding scope, which is what you're normally doing, okay, probably a good sales decision. Running the project without good scope, bad decision, okay? And scope the project before the work starts. If I'm going to be over by 30%, I'd rather know that on day one than on day 100. On day 100, I've all of a sudden I have a need for 30% more resources, but I've got a full book with all my other projects. That creates contagion. I'd rather know up front and I can plan and make sure I've got enough people allocated, they don't blow up the schedule either. Who owns scope? Yeah. And selling, the people in your organization that sell, and hopefully the client owns scope in that way. But when delivering, the team and the client need to understand scope. And I've got this little diagram here, okay? Here's our level of understanding. This is the optimal configuration. I can tell you projects run really well, okay, when they look like this, okay? And this is kind of the opposite of what it is a lot of times, okay? What we're saying here really is that basically, if the client and the team both understand scope and have a correct scope that they understand well with each other, everything else happens fine. I don't care whether the other people understand scope, okay? If I flip that around, then I'm in project hell, okay? Team and client don't understand what the project really is. Everyone else thinks they do, and it creates a complete nightmare. All right. So I've covered these topics. I'm going to hit one last topic here, which is an important one. And just because people don't understand how bad even just estimating is in a highly uncertain environment. And so this interesting problem here, which is a more accurate estimate, okay? And I'll put this up, and a lot of times people will say the second one, 97.8 hours. That's very accurate. And that's wrong, okay? What we're really saying is that it depends on how much uncertainty exists in the situation, okay? If there's a lot of uncertainty, then the first one may be more accurate, okay? Which is more likely the case inside of an agency. But we don't estimate that way. If we estimated that way, it would terrify us, okay? We actually have a technique called range-based estimation that we teach sometimes to some agencies who really grapple with that sort of wide ranges of stuff. But but in general, range-based estimation applies. Even like having a designer work on something for 12 hours, you say, oh, it should take 12 hours. What do we really mean? We don't mean it'll take 12 hours. We mean it'll take somewhere between 8 and 18 hours, right? Okay. And so if the designer takes more than 12 hours, what happens? We wonder what they're doing wrong. But the real range was 8 to 18, right? Of course, saying a precise number, like saying it should take 12 hours, it's false precision. It's not true. It's 12 hours plus or minus 30% or something like that. So, correct assumptions that help you start fixing scope. What you don't know is the problem, right? More managing on top of it, having more managers understand scope makes it worse. Teams and clients need to understand the scope because teams estimate better. The way you brief traditionally hand off projects is a fail as well. And teams and clients should actually own scope. At the end of the day, sales scope and delivery scope are two separate things. Actually, when we teach sales scoping, one of the things we do is we say, after we show them, now that they've seen how delivery scoping works, we show them how to do sales scoping. And we say, once you've done that and sold the deal, burn that. Okay. You don't want people seeing that and not being able to see through it to the uncertainty. We actually make them start from scratch. Works way, way, way better. Speaking of us, a little bit what we've helped over 200 agencies with dropping rework rates, increasing productive flow, and making people a lot happier. We generally work with agencies in this sort of range. So we've worked with WPP's Global Team Blue, 3,500 person agency, and several multi-hundred person agencies and the like. But generally, about 80 90% of our clients by number fall in this area. We're recognized both in industry and other places as being very good. Over 230 agencies now with some nice productivity gains. I'm going to go flip forward to, we do have a couple offerings that are actually pretty low cost and fast to do, and you can get your leg up on your organization. One's the agency productivity diagnostic workshop, where we help you understand where you're failing in terms of scoping and estimation, and also productive delivery, what we call productive flow. And here's the scorecard, for example, that we use, that we create as part of that fairly $2,500 workshop that we do. It's great for offsites as well. And we also have the CEO advisory service, which is actually becoming quite popular. And that the advisory service is 8 hours of consulting. Some of those hours are used to do a productivity diagnostic, but you get some extra consulting out of that as well. You get to see what it's like to work with moi and the rest of AgencyAgile. If you are curious about more details on this whole amorphous scope problem and the like, the book does. I did spend a lot of pages in the book talking about how scope really works. So you get a more detailed version of that in there, and it could be helpful as well. I'll pause here and see if you guys have any questions. I'll bring up the Q&A panel at 11:40. That's not bad. Drop out of boom. Drop out of share. Stop the recording too.